I agree, by the way, with President Trump firing the labor stats official, because forget like the last 2 months. During Biden, 45 of 48 months were revised downwards after the fact. So something has to be done. If you're wrong almost every time for 4 years, well, I'm sorry, you're gone. You got to lose your job there. Overall, 4.2% historically is quite good. Obviously, 84,000 jobs, as you reported, slashed from the federal government. And we all remember Ronald Reagan's most famous 9 words, which is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? So that's the whole thing, that if we're slashing government, we're reducing it, unemployment's low, growth is up, wages are up. Right now, all I know is that not just Chuck Schumer, but Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize-winning Pulitzer economist, said that the tariffs would be an utter failure. That's when you knew they would work, because it's the same guy who said the internet would have the impact on the economy the same way the fax machine would, and predicted a global recession when Donald Trump was elected in 2016. So I'd say overall, things are going quite well right now.
Things are going quite well. I would love.
Boy. So we got to continue our coverage of the mainstream liberal media and their latest fake meltdown against the Trump administration over the fact that President Trump has fired the Biden Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner because of the fact that the reports continue to be wrong. Okay, they're wrong. They're really wrong. The May and June report got revised down by about 90%. We're talking about 291,000 initial reported jobs that, you know, the Bureau of Labor Statistics claim were created in May and June, just for them to come out a few months later and say, nah, 88% of those jobs didn't actually exist, right? We revised it down to 33,000 jobs. So 250,000 jobs that we thought existed didn't actually exist, right? They weren't created. Now, again, this, in my opinion, is a big deal because we have major economic decisions being made based off of these job reports. And if they can't get it correct, or put it this way, if they can't get it close to correct with the initial reports, then changes need to be made. And President Trump is making changes, but the mainstream liberal media, they're boohoo-whining and crowd about it, claiming that Trump is trying to rig the jobs reports that were already rigged, right? Already rigged. That, like, what do you call being off by 90%? Right? If that ain't rigged, I don't know what to tell you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into Trump economic official Kevin Hassett, school NBC news anchor Kristen Welker on this topic. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it.
And joining me now is the director of the White House National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett. Mr. Hassett, welcome to Meet the Press.
Great to be here. Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Let's start with President Trump's decision to fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Erica McIntyre, who he accused of manipulating job numbers. Mr. Hassett, what evidence does the administration have that she manipulated the jobs numbers?
Right. Well, what we've seen over the last few years is massive revisions to the jobs numbers. In fact, they were extremely reliable, the kind of numbers that you want to guide policy decisions and markets through COVID. And then when COVID happened, because response rates went down a lot, then revision rates skyrocketed so that the typical monthly revision often was bigger than the number itself. And now we had a number that just came out. The actual number for the month wasn't so bad, but the 2 months before were revised down by more than had ever happened since 1968. And in 2015, Alan Greenspan and I were asked to attend a conference at BLS where we were asked to give advice about how to modernize the data. And we warned that if they didn't try to let the data collection and calculation keep up with the data that was happening in the economy, that we would have problems like this. And finally, in the UK, they had a very similar problem. And in 2023, they had to, for a while, shut down the data agency in the UK for the same kinds of problems.
But just to be very clear, does the administration have any evidence that it was rigged, as the president said? And will you be presenting that to the American public?
Well, the evidence is that there have been a bunch of revisions that could appear to partisans. Well, I mean, the revisions are hard evidence. There, for example, there was a 818,000 revision making the Joe Biden job record a lot worse that came out after he withdrew from the presidential campaign. There have been a bunch of patterns that could make people wonder. And I think the most important thing for people to know is that it's the president's highest priority that the data be trusted and that people get to the bottom of why these revisions are so unreliable.
Facts. I mean, that's ultimately what this comes down to, the fact is that the initial reports are not reliable. We have economic decisions, including the Federal Reserve, okay, making decisions about what to do with interest rates based off these job reports. If the data is not accurate, then that means that the wrong decisions are being made. Wrong decisions being made negatively impacts the American people. I don't understand why is that the media wants to play this game where they want to pretend as if the initial numbers being wrong is not a problem, right? That's not a big deal. Like, that doesn't have negative effects when you're talking about trying to make decisions about the economy, right? They want to keep talking about, well, Trump is firing her because he didn't like the numbers. Well, nobody should like the numbers being wrong, right? Anybody we pissed off about a bunch of jobs that you thought were created that actually were not created. Yeah, I think anybody, any reasonable person should be pissed off about that and be asking questions about, okay, what's going on here, right? Why is it that we continue to get these off numbers? And it starts with the top, okay? One thing a CEO can't stand is to get bad data, because you have to make decisions based off the data. And if you're making data-driven decisions and the data is wrong, then you're making bad decisions. And that's how CEOs get fired, right? That's how people lose their jobs. That's how companies go bankrupt. That's how United States, again, as a country, this is how we make bad economic decisions when we're relying on bad data. Clearly, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they're giving us bad data. Instead of being concerned about the fact that we're getting bad data, they're more concerned about Trump firing the person who is in charge of the data, right? She is the head person, okay? Whether or not she actually has a hands-on approach to dealing with the data, that's irrelevant. She's in charge of running that operation, and she has to be held accountable when she is not delivering an accurate product. Again, this is not complicated stuff.
Well, let me ask you about what William Beach, he was the last commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. He was appointed by President Trump. He was sharply critical of this decision to get rid of his successor. I want to read you what he wrote. He says, quote, "These numbers are constructed by hundreds of people. They're finalized by about 40 people. These 40 people are very professional people who've served under Republicans and Democrats, and the commissioner does not see these numbers until the Wednesday prior to the release on Friday. By that time, the numbers are completely set into the IT system. They've been programmed. They are simply reported to the commissioner so the commissioner can on Thursday brief the president's economic team. The commissioner doesn't have any hand or any influence or any way of even knowing the data until they're completely done." Isn't this the very definition of shooting the messenger?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the bottom line is that there were people involved in creating these numbers. And if I were running the BLS and I had a number that was a huge politically important revision, the biggest since 1968, actually revisions should be smaller, right, because computers are better and so on, then I would have a really long report explaining exactly what happened. And we didn't get that. We didn't get that. And so right now, people, Goldman Sachs, people on Wall Street are wondering, where did these revisions come from and why do they keep happening? And what we need is a fresh set of eyes over at the BLS. And there are great career staffers. One of the top BLS staffers is actually working in the White House to help us understand the jobs numbers. When I saw the jobs revisions, I literally called up that person and said, I think there's a typo. Because I've been following these numbers all the way back when I worked with Alan Greenspan for something like 40 years, and I've never seen revisions like this.
But just to be very clear, I mean, there are 40 people put these numbers together. Is the president planning to fire all 40 people involved in putting these numbers together?
We're going to try to get the numbers so that they're transparent and reliable.
President
Yeah, and again, I don't know why these people keep avoiding the obvious fact that there's something wrong when the numbers are off by this much. And it has become especially bad during the pandemic. Okay, this is when the numbers really started to be just not reliable at all, which again is just not good for anybody in business, any investor, right? Any company, anybody, just even normal regular people. It's not good for the government to have unreliable statistics, right? It's just not good, right? Instead of acknowledging that, they're trying to basically defend a woman who's clearly doing a bad job, right? At the end of the day, okay, the job of the BLS commissioner is to ensure the accuracy, reliability, and impartiality of key economic indicators, like the jobs report, like the inflation reports, like the unemployment rate, like the wage data, productivity, all of that stuff. Their job is to ensure that is accurate. When you're off by 90%, that is not accurate. That is not accurate. Somebody needs to be held accountable. There's no reason why the initial report should be off by 90%. If they need more time before producing a report, then they should take more time before saying how many jobs were created in any given month, just to make sure they get them right the first time. Because again, economic decisions are being made based off this stuff. But again, the liberal media, they want to focus on everything except that. It's almost as if they want the administration to be making bad decisions with bad data, right? It's almost as if that's what they want. That's exactly what they want. Because again, in this situation, had the revised numbers been reported in the initial reports, interest rates would have been cut. We probably would have a 50 basis point cut by now had those numbers shown up in those jobs reports at the time of release. And that's a big difference. That's a big deal. That's a huge deal. So, yeah, I understand why the president fired this woman, and he's right to fire her because ultimately somebody has to be held accountable for this.
Trump himself was happy to accept the jobs numbers issued under McIntyre's leadership when the numbers were good. Take a listen to what he said in the past.
The numbers were much better, as you know, than projected by the media. In 3 months, we have created 350,000 jobs. Think of that.
A lot of jobs are being created. That's what happened this morning. We saw the jobs.
So is the president prepared to fire anyone who reports data that he disagrees with?
No, absolutely not. The president wants his own people there so that when we see the numbers, they're more transparent and more reliable. And if there are big changes and big revisions, we expect more big revisions for the jobs data in September, for example, then we want to know why. We want people to explain it to us.
All right, but bottom line, were the numbers wrong? Do you have any hard evidence that you can present to the American public that these numbers, these revisions that were reported, and there were plenty of revisions under former President Biden, including right before the election, do you have any hard evidence that these numbers were wrong?
Yeah, there is very hard evidence that we're looking at the biggest revision since 1968.
Are you going to present
if
that
you look
evidence?
at the number itself, it is the evidence.
But just saying it's an outlier is not evidence, Mr. Hassett.
It's a historically important outlier. It's something that's unprecedented.
Still
So unprecedented
it's still
that
not
I've been looking at
evidence,
it
though.
for 40 years, and I'm like, it must be a typo.
Okay. All right.
Wow, these people are so stupid. These people are so dumb. Kristen Welker, what is the evidence that the numbers are wrong? Well, the evidence that the numbers are wrong is the fact that you have to make these giant revisions. That's the evidence, right? The report in and of itself, the numbers being wrong, which we knew that the initial numbers were wrong, is evidence that the reports are not accurate. And even the quote unquote revisions are probably not accurate either because the 2024 jobs report is set to undergo another revision. Okay. And we already know that they got that one off by at least 818,000 jobs already. So there is no guarantee that the revisions are correct. Okay. And that's the problem. The problem is that when you have these unusually large revisions continuing to happen, that is what erodes trust in the data. Okay. Trump replacing the person that's in charge of the data does not erode trust in data that already is not being trusted, right? People can't trust the data. Okay. They can't trust it. So trying to restore trust in the data is actually the right thing to do. But again, the media is trying to spin it into the exact opposite. Trump is trying to destroy trust in the data. No, nobody wants to be celebrating jobs that actually weren't created. Nobody wants to do that, right? When you go out and you celebrate your accomplishments, right? What you're doing for the American people, you want to make sure that what you're actually doing is real. Okay. It's not made up. Okay. Yeah. So you see that, you heard that. Okay. The mainstream liberal media, they're ridiculous. Okay. Especially when it comes to this story. They're more concerned about Trump firing the lady rather than the statistics being wrong, right? And the fact is that at the end of the day, it's not good for the country to have policymakers making decisions based off bad data. Okay, you would think that the media would understand that, right? That they would acknowledge that, yeah, that's not a good thing. The data should be more accurate. Instead, no, they're boohoo, whining, and crying because somebody's being held accountable for the bad data. Almost as if they want our policy makers to not have good data, aka the Trump administration to not have good data, so that they make bad decisions and then they can turn around and they can blame Trump, right? I think that's what's happening here. Okay, this is the media once again showing that they hate Trump more than they love this country. Because if you love this country, then you should want the decision makers to have accurate numbers, right? When the numbers come out, when they initially come out, you should want the decision makers to have a good idea of what's actually going on with the economy so that they can make good decisions for the American people. But clearly, that's not what the media wants. The media would rather the president make bad decisions and for the economy to collapse than for the American people to have decisions be made based off accurate data. Again, it really shows you how much the American media hates Trump more than they love this country. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.